My mother's necklace was all I had left of her, and when it went missing, my son said, "Stop whining, it's already sold. I needed that money for my trip." Desperate, I called the pawn shop trying to get it back, and they said, "Ma'am, you won't believe what we found when we opened the locket on the pendant." I didn't even know it opened. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I went from sobbing over a stolen necklace to discovering I was sitting on a fortune that would make my ungrateful family's jaws drop. 3 hours earlier, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I noticed the empty jewelry box on my dresser. You know that feeling when something's wrong, but your brain hasn't quite caught up yet? That was me, staring at the spot where my mother's necklace should have been. "Danny!" I called out to my 28-year-old son, who was supposed to be packing for his Vegas trip with his buddies. "Have you seen my mother's necklace?" The silence that followed should have been my first clue. Danny appeared in the doorway, looking like a deer caught in headlights, except this deer was wearing a $500 leather jacket I definitely hadn't bought him. "About that," he started, and my stomach dropped. "I borrowed it." Borrowed, as if my mother's most precious possession was a cup of sugar. "What do you mean, borrowed?" I kept my voice steady, though my hands were starting to shake. "Look, Mom, I needed quick cash for the trip. The guys were counting on me, and you know how tight money's been since the divorce." He had the audacity to look annoyed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "It's not like you ever wear it." Not like I ever wear it? It was my mother's wedding necklace, the only thing she managed to save when my father lost everything in that poker game back in 1987. She wore it every day until the day she died, and then she gave it to me with trembling hands, whispering, "Keep this safe, Margaret. It's more important than you know." But sure, Danny, I never wear it because I'm saving it for special occasions. Silly me, thinking my son wouldn't steal from his own mother. "Where is it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Murphy's Pawn on 5th Street. But don't worry, I've got 30 days to get it back." He said this like he was doing me a favor. "I'll have the money after Vegas. Tommy's got this surefire system for blackjack." Tommy's surefire system. Right. Tommy was the same genius who convinced Danny to invest his entire inheritance from his grandfather into some cryptocurrency that disappeared faster than free beer at a college party. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Danny called after me. "To fix your mess," I said, because even at 53, apparently, I was still cleaning up after my son. Some things never change, even when everything else falls apart. The divorce from Carl had been finalized 6 months ago, and I was still adjusting to living on my secretary's salary instead of his dental practice income. Tight budget was putting it mildly. I was counting every penny and doing math in the grocery store that would make an accountant weep. But that necklace? That necklace was worth more than money. It was the last piece of my mother I had left. Murphy's Pawn was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly, the smell of desperation mixed with cigarettes, and jewelry displayed behind glass like prison inmates waiting for parole. The man behind the counter looked like he'd seen every sob story in the book and believed none of them. "Help you?" "My son brought in a necklace yesterday. Gold chain with a heart-shaped locket. I'd like to buy it back." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a small velvet box. When he opened it, there was my mother's necklace, looking smaller and sadder under those harsh lights. $300 to reclaim it," he said. $300, half my monthly grocery budget. But what choice did I have? As I counted out the bills with shaking hands, the pawn shop owner held up the necklace to examine it. "Pretty piece, classic workmanship." He squinted at the locket. "Huh, this thing's got a catch on it." "A what?" "A catch. Like it opens." He pressed something on the side of the heart, and suddenly the locket popped open with a soft click. My mother had worn that necklace for 40 years, and I'd owned it for 3. Neither of us had ever known it opened. Inside was a tiny photograph of a little girl I didn't recognize, and a piece of paper folded so small it was barely visible. "Ma'am," the pawnshop owner said, his voice suddenly different, "you might want to sit down." I unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, trying to make sense of the tiny, careful handwriting. It looked like my mother's script, but the words made no sense at first. First National Bank of Denver, Inc. Account $47291. Password, Margaret Rose, 1971. Margaret Rose, my full name, 1971, the year I was born. This is my name, I whispered, staring at the paper. The pawn shop owner leaned forward. Ma'am, that looks like banking information. Old banking information. Old banking information. My mother had been dead for 15 years. What could possibly still be active after all this time? The photograph in the locket showed a little girl with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile, maybe 5 or 6 years old. She was wearing a white dress and holding a doll. I didn't recognize her, but something about her eyes seemed familiar. Do you have a phone I could use? I asked. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car outside Murphy's Pawn with my cell phone pressed to my ear, listening to the most impossible conversation of my life. First National Bank, how may I help you? I found some old banking information, and I was wondering if the account might still be active. It's probably a long shot, but I gave them the account number, my voice barely steady. 1 moment, please. The hold music felt like it lasted forever. When the representative came back, her voice was different. Ma'am, could you please verify the account password? My heart stopped. Margaret Rose, 1971. Thank you. Mrs. Henderson, I'm showing significant activity on this account. Have you been receiving our monthly statements? Mrs. Henderson. That was my mother's maiden name, before she married my father and everything went wrong. No, I didn't know this account existed. Oh my, this is unusual. The account shows automatic deposits dating back to 1987, shortly after it was opened. I'm showing a current balance of... She paused. Ma'am, are you sitting down? I wasn't, but I gripped the steering wheel tighter. How much? $847,412.18. The phone slipped from my hand. $847,000. My mother, who had worried about every grocery bill, who had darned socks and clipped coupons religiously, who had lived in that tiny apartment until the day she died because she said she couldn't afford anything better. My mother had been sitting on nearly $1 million. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? $847,412.18. The automatic deposits appear to be from mineral rights to some property in Colorado. About $2,000 monthly since 1987. Mineral rights. Property in Colorado. My mother had never mentioned owning property anywhere, let alone property valuable enough to generate $2,000 a month for nearly 37 years. I need to come in, I said. I need to see this account. Of course, Mrs. Henderson. I should mention there are also several safe deposit boxes registered to this account. When would you like to schedule an appointment? Safe deposit boxes. Plural. I ended the call and sat in the Murphy's Pawn parking lot, staring at the tiny photograph of the little girl. The little girl who looked like me. The little girl my mother had kept secret in a locket I never knew could open. My phone rang. Danny. Hey, Mom. Did you get the necklace back? Because if you couldn't afford it, I understand. We can try again after Vegas. If I couldn't afford it, $300. I was holding information about $800,000, and my son was worried I couldn't scrape together $300. I got it back, I said. Great. So listen, I was thinking maybe you could spot me another couple hundred for Vegas, just for emergencies, you know. I promise I'll pay you back after Tommy's system pays off. Tommy's system. Right. The same Tommy who was probably Googling how to count cards without getting thrown out of casinos right about now. But for the first time in months, I wasn't worried about money. I was worried about secrets. I was worried about the mother I thought I knew and the mother who had apparently been living a completely different life. Danny, I said, I need to ask you something. Did your grandmother ever mention anything about property? Or investments? Or Colorado? Grandma? Are you kidding? She lived in that crappy apartment and ate canned soup for dinner half the time. Why would you ask that? Because apparently I didn't know my mother at all. No reason. Have fun in Vegas. I hung up and looked at the photograph again. The little girl's eyes definitely looked familiar now. They looked like mine. But if this was me, why didn't I remember the picture being taken? And why had my mother hidden it in a secret compartment I'd never known existed? More importantly, why had my mother let me struggle through my divorce, worry about money, stress about Danny's future, when she was sitting on almost $1 million? Unless she wasn't sitting on it. Unless she was saving it. For me. The First National Bank of Denver was a 40-minute drive from my house, which gave me plenty of time to practice not having a panic attack. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I had convinced myself this was all a mistake. Probably someone else's account. Probably a computer error. Probably anything other than my dead mother having a secret fortune. The bank lobby was all marble and brass, the kind of place where poor people like me usually feel unwelcome. But when I gave my name to the receptionist, something magical happened. Her entire demeanor changed. "Mrs. Henderson, please, have a seat. Mr. Davidson will be right with you." Mr. Davidson turned out to be the branch manager, a distinguished man in his 60s who greeted me like I was visiting royalty. "Mrs. Henderson, it's such a pleasure to finally meet you. Your mother spoke of you often." He led me to a private office. "Though I have to admit, we were starting to wonder if you'd ever claim the account." "You knew my mother?" "Oh yes, she came in quarterly for nearly 30 years. Always asked about you. Always wanted to know if we'd heard from you." He pulled out a thick file. "She left very specific instructions about this account." He handed me a letter in my mother's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've finally found what I've been keeping safe for you. I'm sorry for the secrets, but I had to protect this money from your father. I had to make sure it would be there for you when you needed it most. The property came from my father, your grandfather Samuel. He bought land in Colorado in the 1950s that nobody wanted. Turns out it sits on top of natural gas deposits. The monthly payments started coming in 1987, right after your father's gambling got really bad. I wanted to tell you so many times, especially when you were struggling in your marriage or worrying about Danny's future. But I knew if Carl found out about this money, he'd find a way to take it. I watched him control every penny you earned, and I wasn't going to let him get his hands on your real inheritance. The little girl in the photograph is you, taken when you were 5, before everything went wrong with your father. I kept it to remember the happiness before the chaos. This money is yours now. Use it wisely. Use it to build the life you deserve. All my love, Mother P.S. There's more in the safe deposit boxes. Things I thought you should have when you were strong enough to handle the truth." I read the letter 3 times before I looked up at Mr. Davidson. "She was protecting me from Carl," I said. "She was very concerned about your situation. She asked me several times about setting up trusts that would keep assets out of reach during divorces." He opened another folder. "She also left these. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Me as a baby. Me taking my first steps. Me on my first day of school, my high school graduation, my wedding day. And Carl looked completely different in these pictures, younger and happier, before he turned into the controlling man who monitored every penny I spent. But there were other pictures too. Pictures I'd never seen. My mother with a man I didn't recognize, both of them laughing. My mother in a beautiful dress at what looked like a fancy restaurant. My mother looking happy in ways I'd never seen growing up. "Who is this man?" I asked, pointing to the stranger. "I believe that was Harold Watson. They dated for several years in the 1990s. He was a kind man, quite wealthy. He wanted to marry your mother. My mother had a boyfriend for several years, and I'd never known." "What happened?" "According to your mother, she was afraid that if she remarried, it might complicate your inheritance rights. She chose financial security for you over personal happiness for herself. The weight of that hit me like a truck. My mother had given up love to protect money she was saving for me. Money I didn't even know existed." "The safe deposit boxes," I said. "What's in them?" Mr. Davidson smiled. "Let's go see." The first box contained more documents. Deeds to the Colorado property, insurance policies, investment statements showing additional accounts I hadn't known about. By the time we finished going through everything, my inheritance wasn't $800,000. It was $1.3 million. The second box contained jewelry. Not expensive pieces, but meaningful ones. My grandmother's wedding ring, my great-grandmother's brooch, a watch that had belonged to my grandfather Samuel, the man who'd bought the worthless land that had turned out to be worth a fortune. The third box contained one more letter marked "Read Last." "Margaret, by now you know about the money, and I hope you're not angry with me for keeping it secret. I had my reasons, but there's something else you need to know. Your father didn't lose all our money in that poker game in 1987. He gambled away money that wasn't ours to lose. He had taken loans from some very dangerous people, using our house as collateral. The mineral rights money didn't just save your inheritance. It saved our lives. I paid off his debts and made him leave town. I told you he abandoned us because I thought it was kinder than the truth. He was a good man who made terrible choices, and those choices put us all in danger. I don't know where he is now, and I don't want to know. But if he ever tries to contact you, if he ever comes back claiming he's changed or wanting to make amends, remember that this money exists. Remember that he doesn't know about it. And remember that some people don't change, no matter how much you want them to. I love you, sweetheart. I'm sorry for all the secrets, but I hope someday you'll understand why they were necessary. Mother. I sat in the bank's private room, surrounded by documents and jewelry and the truth about my family, and I started to cry. Not sad tears exactly, overwhelmed tears, grateful tears, angry tears. My mother had protected me from everything, from my father's dangerous choices, from Carl's financial control, from my own tendency to give too much to people who didn't deserve it. People like Danny. My phone buzzed with a text from my son. Hey Mom, change of plans. Need $500 instead of $200. The guys want to upgrade our hotel suite. Can you transfer it today? $500 to upgrade a hotel suite. From a son who had stolen my mother's necklace to pay for a vacation. A son who didn't know I was now worth $1.3 million. A son who was about to learn that his mother wasn't the pushover he thought she was. I texted back, "We need to talk when you get home." His response came immediately. "Can't it wait? We're leaving for the airport in an hour." No, I thought. Looking at my mother's careful handwriting. It can't wait, but maybe it should. I drove home in a daze, my purse full of legal documents and my mind spinning with 30 years of revelations. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Danny was loading his suitcase into his friend Tommy's beat-up Honda. "Perfect timing," he called out. "Can you grab my phone charger from inside? And maybe that 500 we talked about?" The 500 we talked about. As if asking your mother for money was just a casual conversation between equals. I walked past him into the house, and he followed, probably sensing something was different about my energy. "You look weird," he said. "Everything okay?" Everything was definitely not okay. Everything was upside down and backwards and completely different than it had been 6 hours ago. But explaining that to Danny felt impossible. "I went to the bank today," I said carefully. "Yeah? Finally opening that savings account you've been talking about?" He was rifling through the kitchen drawers looking for his charger, not really paying attention to me. Something like that. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out one of the bank documents. "Danny, we need to have a serious conversation about money." That got his attention. He turned around with a look of panic on his face. "Oh God, you're broke, aren't you? The divorce settlement wasn't what you thought? Mom, if you're in financial trouble, I can't help. I mean, I would if I could, but I barely make enough at the warehouse to cover my own expenses." Danny worked part-time at a warehouse and lived in my basement, rent-free, eating my food and using my utilities. His idea of barely covering his own expenses was laughable. "I'm not broke," I said. "Quite the opposite, actually." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I found out today that your grandmother left me some money. Quite a bit of money." Danny's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Grandma had money? How much money? And there it was. Not, "That's wonderful, Mom," or "I'm sorry you're just finding out now," or even, "Is everything okay?" Just how much money? "Enough," I said carefully. "Enough for what? Enough to pay off your credit cards? Enough to fix the car? Enough to—" He paused and I could practically see the calculations running in his head. "Enough to help me get my own place?" My own place. After living in my basement for 2 years, eating my food, using my car when his broke down, and now stealing my jewelry to fund his Vegas trips, Danny's first thought was how this windfall could help him move out, not help him pay me back for all the support I'd given him. Not help him get his life together. Help him get his own place so he could continue making poor financial decisions without my oversight. "Danny," I said slowly, "when you took my mother's necklace, did you think about how that might make me feel?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I told you I'm going to pay you back. It's just a temporary thing. With Tommy's surefire blackjack system? Hey, Don't knock Tommy. He's been studying this stuff for months. He's got books and everything. Books. Tommy had books. Well, that changed everything. Clearly, this was a sophisticated financial strategy. And if Tommy's system doesn't work? Danny shrugged. Then we'll figure something else out. Maybe I can pick up extra shifts at the warehouse. Maybe he could pick up extra shifts to pay back money he'd stolen from his mother after gambling it away in Las Vegas. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become this person? When had he stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a source of funding? When had he decided that my feelings, my financial security, my peace of mind were all secondary to his immediate desires? The money your grandmother left, I said. It comes with some conditions. That wasn't true, but Danny didn't need to know that yet. What kind of conditions? The kind that require some serious conversations about respect and responsibility. Danny's phone buzzed. Mom, that's Tommy. We really need to leave for the airport. Can we talk about this when I get back? And can you just transfer the $500? I promise we'll figure out all the details later. We'll figure out all the details later. The details of my inheritance. The details of his theft. The details of his complete lack of consideration for anyone but himself. No, I said. Danny stared at me. No, what? No, I won't transfer the money. No, we can't talk about this later. And no, I'm not going to keep enabling this pattern. What pattern? Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just money. Just money. My mother's jewelry was just money. My financial security was just money. My feelings about being stolen from were just drama. Danny, I want you to think very carefully about your next words. Something in my tone must have gotten through to him because he actually paused. Mom, I don't understand what's happening here. What's happening is that I'm finally seeing clearly. And what I see is a 28-year-old man who thinks his mother exists to fund his lifestyle while showing her no respect in return. That's not... He started to protest, then stopped. Look, maybe I could have asked differently about the necklace, but you never wear it, and I was desperate. You never wear it. There it was again. The justification that my sentimental attachments didn't matter because he couldn't see their value. Go to Vegas, I said, standing up. Have fun with Tommy's system, but when you come back, things are going to be different. Different how? I smiled, and I could see it made him nervous. You'll find out. Danny left for the airport looking confused and slightly worried. Good. Maybe a little uncertainty would be educational for him. I spent the rest of the day reading through my mother's documents and thinking about the last 2 years of my life. The divorce, the financial struggles, the way I'd let both Carl and Danny treat me like a resource rather than a person. My mother had spent decades protecting money so I could have choices. Now it was time to start making them. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I ordered pizza from the expensive place with the good ingredients. I bought myself a bottle of wine. I sat in my living room with my mother's jewelry box and her letters, and I planned my new life. Danny's Vegas trip was going to be very educational, but not in the way he expected. Danny called from Vegas on day 2 of his trip, and his voice had lost all its cocky confidence. Mom, we have a problem. I was sitting in my garden with my morning coffee, reading through investment portfolios I'd never known existed. The morning sun felt different when you weren't worried about money. Everything felt different. What kind of problem? I asked, though I could already guess. Tommy's system didn't exactly work out. Didn't exactly work out. I wondered how much money you had to lose before didn't exactly work out became complete disaster. How much? I asked. How much what? How much did you lose, Danny? There was a long pause. The thing is, we kind of lost more than we brought. More than they brought. Which meant they'd gotten credit. Which meant they owed money they didn't have. Which meant Danny was about to ask me to bail him out of a situation that could have been avoided if he'd listened to his mother instead of his friend Tommy, the gambling genius. Define more than you brought. Look, the casino gave us a line of credit. They said it was standard for serious players. We figured we'd win it back before we had to pay. They figured, based on Tommy's books, presumably. Danny, how much do you owe? $12,000. I set down my coffee cup. $12,000. But here's the thing. We still have 2 days left, and Tommy thinks he's figured out what went wrong with his system. We just need a little more capital to get back to even. A little more capital. to chase $12,000 in gambling losses, based on Tommy's revised system. And you're calling me because you said Grandma left money. And this is kind of an emergency. Kind of an emergency. Not a crisis of his own making, not a consequence of ignoring every piece of financial advice I'd ever given him. Just a little emergency that required dipping into his dead grandmother's inheritance. Danny, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Okay? Come home. Right now. Today. Mom, we can't just leave. We owe 12 grand. The casino isn't going to just forget about it. You're right. They're not going to forget about it. Which is why you need to come home before you owe them 24,000. But if we can just get back to even, with what money? Danny? You're broke. Tommy's broke. Where exactly is this additional capital going to come from? That's what I'm saying. Grandma's money is not going to fund your gambling addiction. It's not an addiction. It's just bad luck. And Tommy really thinks he's got it figured out now. Tommy really thinks. The same Tommy who'd been wrong about everything so far. Danny, get on a plane. Come home. We'll figure out the 12,000. I heard him exhale in relief. Thank God. I knew you'd understand. So should I give them your credit card number or... No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. You're not giving anyone my credit card number. Then how? Come home first. We'll deal with the casino debt after you're here. Mom, I don't think you understand how casinos work. They don't just let you leave with outstanding debt. Actually, I was pretty sure Danny didn't understand how casinos worked, considering he'd managed to lose $12,000 in 2 days. But I didn't say that. They'll work with you on a payment plan if you're honest with them about your situation. Come home. After I hung up, I called the casino directly. It took some transfers and some explaining, but eventually I spoke with someone in their credit department. Yes, we have a Daniel Mitchell with an outstanding balance of $12,347. He's listed you as his emergency contact. Of course he had. I'm calling to let you know that I won't be covering his debt, I said. He needs to work out his own payment arrangement. There was a pause. Ma'am, your son indicated you'd be handling the balance. My son was mistaken. 2 hours later, Danny called back. His voice was different now, panicked. Mom, what did you do? They said you called and told them you weren't paying. That's correct. But you said we'd figure it out. We will. You will. I'll help you understand your options, but I'm not writing a check. Mom, this is serious. They're talking about collections. They said they might press charges. For $12,000 in casino debt. I doubted that, but it was possible they were trying to scare him. Either way, this was a lesson he needed to learn. Then you'd better get home and start figuring out how to handle this responsibly. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'm not doing anything to you. Danny, I'm stopping myself from doing things for you. That distinction was lost on him, but it wasn't lost on me. For 2 years, I'd been enabling his irresponsibility by cushioning the consequences of his choices. No more. Danny arrived home the next evening, looking like he'd aged 5 years and 5 days. His confident swagger was gone, replaced by the posture of someone who'd finally run headfirst into reality. We need to talk, he said, dropping his suitcase by the front door. Yes, we do. We sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in months, Danny actually looked at me when I spoke, instead of checking his phone or planning his next request. Mom, I'm in real trouble here. I know. The casino wants a payment plan, $500 a month for 2 years. $500 a month. On his part-time warehouse salary. Can you afford $500 a month? I asked. Danny's laugh was bitter. Are you kidding? I can barely afford my car payment. Then you need to make some changes. What kind of changes? I pulled out a piece of paper I'd been working on. Full-time job, real budget, no more gambling, no more expensive trips with Tommy. Mom, and rent. Danny stared at me. Rent? You're 28 years old, living in my basement. It's time to start paying your way. With what money? You just said I have to pay the casino $500 a month. Figure it out. For the first time in our conversation, Danny got angry. This is insane. You've got Grandma's money sitting in the bank, and you're going to let me get destroyed over $12,000. That money has nothing to do with your poor choices. Poor choices? Mom, everyone has bad luck sometimes. Bad luck is losing $50 on a scratch-off ticket. $12,000 in casino debt is a pattern of poor decisions. Danny stood up, pacing now. I can't believe this. My own mother is going to let me get sued over money that doesn't even mean anything to you. Doesn't even mean anything to me. My mother's lifelong sacrifice, her protection of my future, her careful planning and secret keeping, all so I could have security and choices. It means everything to me, I said quietly. Then help me. I am helping you. I'm helping you learn that actions have consequences. Danny stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Not anger, not manipulation, not the confidence that Mom would always bail him out. Fear, real, genuine fear of having to face the consequences of his own choices. What if I can't do it? He asked. And for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. Then you'll figure it out. Because that's what adults do. But as I watched my son slump in his chair, looking lost and overwhelmed, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. For the first time in years, Danny was looking at his life clearly. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. The question was, what was I going to need? 3 weeks later, Danny was working double shifts at the warehouse and coming home every night looking like he'd been hit by a truck. But he was paying his bills. More importantly, he was starting to understand that money didn't just magically appear when you needed it. I, on the other hand, was having the time of my life. I'd moved out of the cramped apartment I'd been renting since the divorce and bought myself a beautiful condo overlooking the river. Nothing too flashy. I wasn't interested in attracting attention. But it had a real kitchen, a garden balcony, and most importantly, it was mine. Danny hadn't said much when I told him about the move. He was too busy trying to figure out how to survive on an actual budget. But I could see the wheels turning in his head. His mother, who used to stress about grocery money, had just bought a condo. Cash. I was unpacking my mother's jewelry box in my new bedroom when my phone rang. Carl's name appeared on the screen, and I stared at it for a moment before answering. Hello, Carl. Margaret. His voice had that patronizing tone I remembered so well. I heard some interesting news. Of course he had. Our small town's gossip network was more efficient than the internet. Oh? What news is that? Danny mentioned you came into some money. An inheritance from your mother, Danny mentioned. I made a mental note to have a conversation with my son about family information and who was entitled to it. Did he? He seemed upset about some gambling debt. Said you refused to help him. Carl's tone suggested this was evidence of my fundamental character flaws. That doesn't sound like the Margaret I know. The Margaret he knew. The Margaret who had spent 15 years walking on eggshells, asking permission to buy groceries, hiding purchases in the trunk until he wasn't home. The Margaret who had let him control every aspect of our financial life while he built his dental practice with her support. People change, Carl. Indeed they do. His voice got that edge I remembered from arguments about money. I've been thinking about our divorce settlement. There it was. I'd been wondering when this conversation would happen. Have you? I think there might have been some misrepresentation of assets during our proceedings. Misrepresentation of assets. Because I hadn't mentioned an inheritance I didn't know existed. I reported every asset I knew about Carl, as did you. But if you inherited money from your mother, then it happened after our divorce was finalized, which means it's none of your business. The silence on the other end told me Carl was calculating. He'd always been good at numbers, less good at accepting when those numbers didn't work in his favor. Margaret, let's be reasonable here. We were married for 15 years. I helped build your relationship with your mother. I drove her to doctor's appointments, remember? He drove my mother to doctor's appointments twice. Because I asked him to. Because I was working 3 jobs to help put him through dental school. What exactly are you suggesting, Carl? I'm suggesting that morally, if not legally, I have some claim to this inheritance. Morally. Carl was going to lecture me about morality. The same Carl who had hidden credit cards from me, who had lied about the practice's income during our divorce, who had fought me for every piece of furniture, every wedding gift, every photograph of our life together. You know what, Carl? You're absolutely right. I could hear the surprise in his voice. I am? Yes, you do have a moral claim to this money. Well, good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. The moral claim is that you should stay as far away from it as possible. The silence stretched so long, I wondered if he'd hung up. Excuse me? You controlled every penny I earned for 15 years. You made me ask permission to buy groceries while you spent thousands on golf equipment. You fought me for custody of the coffee maker during our divorce. And now you think you deserve half of money my mother kept secret specifically to protect me from men like you? Men like me? Margaret, I supported you through... You supported yourself through dental school with my help. There's a difference. I hung up before he could respond. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Carl standing on my front porch in his best suit, holding flowers. Flowers. As if this were a date instead of an attempted financial shakedown. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Margaret, I think we got off on the wrong foot. We got divorced. Carl, that was the foot we got off on. He smiled that charming smile that had worked on me for so many years. Can I come in? I brought you these. He held up the flowers. No, you can't come in. And I'm allergic to whatever those are. I wasn't allergic to anything, but Carl had never paid enough attention to learn that. Margaret, please, let's talk about this like adults. Like adults. As opposed to all those years when he'd treated me like a child who couldn't be trusted with financial decisions. We're talking now. I mean really talk. About the future. About what this money could mean for both of us. Both of us. There it was. What exactly did you have in mind, Carl? His eyes lit up. Well, I've been thinking about expanding the practice. Maybe opening a second location. This could be the perfect opportunity for us to build something together. Build something together. After 15 years of him building something while I provided the foundation. And what would I get out of this partnership? We'd be partners, equal partners. We could even remarry, make it official. Remarry. Because apparently my newfound financial independence made me attractive to him again. That's quite an offer, I said. Let me think about it. Carl's smile got wider. Take all the time you need. But Margaret, don't let other people influence your decision. Danny's a good kid, but he doesn't understand business like we do. We. As if 15 minutes of conversation had made us a team again. I'll keep that in mind. After he left, I called my lawyer. It was time to make sure my assets were properly protected from any future claims. My mother had been smart to keep her money secret. Maybe it was time for me to be equally strategic. But first, I had a conversation to have with Danny about sharing family information with people who weren't entitled to it. Danny was in my old kitchen. His kitchen now, since I'd given him first right of refusal on the rental when I moved out, eating cereal straight from the box when I arrived the next morning. We need to talk about your father, I said without preamble. Danny looked guilty immediately. He called you, didn't he? He did, after you apparently told him about my inheritance. Mom, I didn't mean to cause trouble. He asked how I was doing, and I mentioned the casino thing, and it just kind of came out. It just kind of came out. 28 years old, and still naive about his father's motivations. Danny, what did your father say when you told him about the money? He seemed surprised. Said he never knew Grandma had that kind of cash. Of course he seemed surprised. Carl had spent years evaluating everyone around him in terms of their financial utility. Learning that my mother had been worth over $1 million probably rocked his entire understanding of our family dynamics. What else did he say? Danny shifted uncomfortably. He asked if you were being smart about investing it. Said maybe you needed some professional advice. Professional advice. From Carl, who had nearly lost his dental practice twice due to poor financial decisions. And what did you say? I said you seemed to have it handled. But Mom, Danny set down his cereal box. He's got a point. What if something happens to that money? What if something happens to that money? The same money that had been professionally managed and successfully invested for 37 years before I even knew it existed. What exactly are you worried about, Danny? I don't know. Bad investments, scams, people trying to take advantage of you. People trying to take advantage of me, like his father. Like the casino that had been perfectly willing to extend credit to someone working part-time at a warehouse. Danny, do you trust my judgment? Of course. Then trust that I can handle my own money. I do, but... He paused, clearly struggling with something. Dad said something else. Of course he did. He said maybe I should be more involved in your financial decisions. You know, to protect your interests. To protect my interests. Or to protect Carl's future access to my assets. Danny, I want you to think very carefully about your answer to this question. Okay, do you think I'm mentally incompetent to handle my own affairs? What? No, Mom, that's not what I meant. Because that's what you're suggesting. That I need a 28-year-old with $12,000 in gambling debt to protect me from financial predators. Danny had the grace to look embarrassed. When you put it like that, how else would I put it? You're right. I'm sorry, Dad made it sound like people with sudden wealth always make mistakes. People with sudden wealth, as opposed to people like Carl, who made mistakes with gradual wealth, borrowed wealth, and other people's wealth on a regular basis. Danny, your father wants something from me. That's why he's suddenly concerned about my welfare. What does he want? My money. And he's trying to use you to get to it. Danny was quiet for a long moment. You think he's manipulating me? I think your father is very good at making his wants sound like other people's needs. That afternoon, I had lunch with my friend Patricia, the only person I'd told about the inheritance. Patricia had been my closest friend since high school, and she had the rare quality of being genuinely happy for other people's good fortune. So Carl wants back in, she said after I'd filled her in on the morning's conversation. Apparently sudden wealth makes me attractive again. Patricia snorted. Sudden wealth makes everyone attractive to Carl. Remember when the Hendersons won the lottery? He suddenly became their best friend. I'd forgotten about that. The Hendersons had won $2 million and suddenly found themselves very popular. Carl had spent months trying to convince them to invest in dental equipment leasing schemes. What should I do about Danny? I asked. Danny's learning. Give him time. Patricia stirred her salad thoughtfully. But Margaret, you might want to think about getting some professional advice. Not from Carl, obviously, but from someone who specializes in wealth management. The bank has investment advisors. I'm not talking about investments. I'm talking about protection. From family members who think your money is their opportunity. Protection from family members. It was sad that I needed to think about that. But Patricia was right. Carl was already circling, and there was no telling what he might convince Danny to do. Do you know anyone? My cousin Rachel went through something similar when her husband died. She used a lawyer who specializes in estate protection. I can get you his name. That evening, I was researching estate protection attorneys when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mrs. Mitchell? This is Detective Rodriguez with the county sheriff's office. We've had a complaint filed against you. My heart stopped. What kind of complaint? Financial elder abuse. Your ex-husband claims you're being manipulated into withholding financial support from your son. Financial elder abuse. Carl had actually called the police and reported me for being financially abused. By myself. Detective, I'm 53 years old. I'm in perfect mental health. And my finances are my own business. I understand, ma'am. But when we get these calls, we have to follow up. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow to discuss the situation? Would I be willing? As if I had a choice. Of course. After I hung up, I sat in my beautiful new condo, looking out at the river, and realized that having money didn't solve all your problems. Sometimes it just gave people more creative ways to create new ones. Detective Rodriguez was younger than I'd expected and more sympathetic than Carl probably hoped. She sat in my living room the next afternoon, declining coffee and taking notes while I explained my situation. So your ex-husband is concerned that someone is influencing your financial decisions? She asked. My ex-husband is concerned that I'm not letting him influence my financial decisions. Detective Rodriguez made a note. And your son's gambling debt? Is something he needs to handle himself, like an adult. Your ex-husband seems to think you're being advised by someone who doesn't have your best interests at heart. I almost laughed. Detective, the only person who's been advising me is my dead mother. She left me very clear instructions about protecting my assets from people who might want to take advantage of me. And who would that include? My ex-husband. For starters. Detective Rodriguez looked up from her notes. Mrs. Mitchell, I have to ask, is there anyone in your life who's been pressuring you to make financial decisions you're uncomfortable with? Yes. My ex-husband. Yesterday he suggested we remarry so he could help me invest in his dental practice expansion. The detective's eyebrows went up slightly. And how did you respond? I hung up on him. Detective Rodriguez smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Mrs. Mitchell, I've been doing this for 8 years. I can usually tell when someone's being coerced or manipulated. You don't strike me as someone who's easily influenced. Thank you. But I do have to ask about your son. Your ex-husband says you're letting him face potential criminal charges over a debt you could easily cover. Potential criminal charges. Carl was really pulling out all the stops. Detective, my son made adult choices that led to adult consequences. I'm helping him learn to handle those consequences responsibly. And you don't think that's harsh? I thought about my mother, working 3 jobs while my father gambled away their security. I thought about the years she'd spent protecting money so I could have choices. I thought about the sacrifices she'd made to keep me safe from the consequences of other people's poor decisions. Detective, my mother spent 30 years protecting me from the consequences of other people's financial mistakes. The kindest thing I can do for my son is help him learn not to make those mistakes in the first place. Detective Rodriguez closed her notebook. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to close this complaint. You're clearly competent to make your own financial decisions, and there's no evidence of abuse or coercion. Will you tell my ex-husband that? I'll tell your ex-husband that we found no evidence of financial abuse, and that any further frivolous reports may result in charges being filed against him for misuse of police resources. After the detective left, I called the estate protection attorney Patricia had recommended. His name was Jonathan Walsh, and his voice on the phone was calm and professional. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you're dealing with some family pressure regarding a recent inheritance. That's a polite way to put it. Why don't you come in tomorrow and we'll discuss your options for protecting your assets? The next morning, I sat in Jonathan Walsh's office and laid out the entire situation. Carl's sudden interest in remarriage, Danny's gambling debt, the police complaint, the pressure to use my mother's money to solve everyone else's problems. This is more common than you might think, Jonathan said when I finished. Sudden wealth often brings out the worst in family relationships. So what can I do? Several things. First, we'll set up an irrevocable trust that protects the majority of your assets from any future claims. Second, we'll make sure your estate planning is ironclad. No loopholes for ex-husbands or children to challenge. Third, we'll document everything that's happened so far in case this escalates. Escalates how? Your ex-husband filed a false police report. That suggests he's willing to go to considerable lengths to access your money. We need to be prepared for more creative attempts. More creative attempts. I was beginning to understand why my mother had kept her money secret for so long. How long will all this take? 2 weeks for the basic protections. But Mrs. Mitchell, you might want to consider not telling anyone about these arrangements, including your son. Including my son. Because even Danny, for all his good intentions, might not be able to resist the pressure Carl was likely to apply. That afternoon, I stopped by the warehouse to see how Danny was doing. I found him loading trucks with a grim determination I'd never seen before. His supervisor told me Danny had volunteered for every available overtime shift for the past month. How's it going? I asked when he took a break. It's going. Danny wiped sweat from his forehead. Mom, I wanted to apologize about telling Dad about the inheritance. I realized afterward that it wasn't my information to share. I appreciate that. And I wanted to ask you something. Okay. Dad called me yesterday. He wants to take me to dinner tonight to discuss family strategy. Danny made air quotes. Should I go? Family strategy. Carl was escalating, just like Jonathan had predicted. What do you want to do? I want to tell him to leave us alone. But, Danny hesitated. What if he's right about some things? What if you do need professional help managing that much money? What if he's right about some things? Carl's greatest talent had always been planting seeds of doubt in reasonable minds. Danny, do you think I've made any poor financial decisions since I learned about this inheritance? Danny considered the question seriously. No, you bought a reasonable condo. You're being smart about investments. You're not being flashy or stupid with the money. Then what makes you think I need your father's help? Nothing, I guess. It's just, he struggled for words. It's hard to think of you as wealthy, you know? You're my mom. You used to stress about grocery money. Because I was married to a man who made me account for every penny while he spent freely on himself. Danny, I want you to remember something. Your father had 15 years to show me how to handle money responsibly. Instead, he spent those years making sure I never had any real control over our finances. I know. But now that I have money he can't control, suddenly he's concerned about my financial education. Danny was quiet for a moment. So you think I shouldn't have dinner with him? I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But Danny, remember that your father wants something. That changes everything, he says. That evening, I waited to see if Danny would call after his dinner with Carl. Instead, I got a text message at 10:30. Dad's full of crap. Thanks for the lesson in recognizing manipulation. I smiled as I turned off my bedroom light. Maybe Danny was learning more than just financial responsibility. But my relief was short-lived. Because at midnight, someone started pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I could see Carl standing on my porch. His hair was disheveled, his tie was loose, and he was holding what looked like legal documents. I didn't open the door. "Margaret, I know you're in there," he pounded again. "We need to talk about this trust." Trust. Somehow Carl knew about the estate protection measures I'd put in place. The documents Jonathan had filed yesterday weren't supposed to be public record yet. "Margaret, you can't just hide money in some shell company and think I won't find out." Shell company. That's not what an irrevocable trust was, but Carl had clearly done some research. Bad research, but research nonetheless. I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? My ex-husband is at my front door at midnight, pounding on it and yelling about my personal financial information. I'm concerned about his mental state and my safety. The pounding continued while I spoke to the dispatcher. Through the peephole, I could see Carl waving the papers and talking to himself. Either he was drunk or having some kind of breakdown. "Ma'am, officers are en route. Stay inside and don't engage with him." 5 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. I watched through my window as they spoke with Carl, who handed them the papers he'd been waving. One officer looked at the documents while the other spoke into his radio. Then they walked Carl to his car and followed him as he drove away. A few minutes later, my doorbell rang. One of the officers was standing on my porch. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Officer Johnson. We spoke with your ex-husband, and he agreed to leave the premises. But ma'am, you might want to look at this." He handed me the papers Carl had been carrying. They were copies of court documents, a petition for guardianship. Carl was asking the court to declare me mentally incompetent and appoint him as my guardian. The petition claimed I was suffering from dementia or diminished capacity that made me vulnerable to financial exploitation. It cited my erratic behavior regarding my son's debt and my sudden, irrational decision to place assets in a trust. Carl had filed papers to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could control my money. "Officer, this is insane. I'm 53 years old, I'm in perfect health, and I'm certainly not mentally incompetent." "Ma'am, we can see that, but you'll need to respond to this petition legally. Do you have an attorney?" "Yes." "Good. And Mrs. Mitchell, your ex-husband seemed agitated tonight. You might want to consider a restraining order." After the officer left, I sat in my living room with Carl's guardianship petition and realized my mother had been even smarter than I'd thought. She hadn't just protected money from irresponsible family members. She'd protected it from dangerous ones. I called Jonathan Walsh's emergency number. "Jonathan, it's Margaret Mitchell. Carl just tried to have me declared mentally incompetent." "At midnight?" "At midnight, with court papers and everything." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, this changes things. A guardianship petition is a serious legal attack. We need to respond immediately and aggressively." "What does that mean?" "It means we don't just defend against his petition. We go on the offense. If Carl wants to question your mental competency, we'll have you evaluated by the best psychiatrists in the state. If he wants to claim financial exploitation, we'll audit every financial decision you've made since learning about the inheritance. And we'll file a counter-petition claiming Carl is the one engaging in exploitative behavior. The false police report, the midnight harassment, this frivolous guardianship petition, it's all evidence of someone trying to manipulate and intimidate you into giving him access to your money." Jonathan was right. Carl had overplayed his hand. Instead of making me look mentally incompetent, he'd made himself look desperate and potentially dangerous. "There's something else," Jonathan continued. "How did Carl know about the trust? Those documents weren't public yet." That was a good question. I'd only told Patricia about meeting with Jonathan, and I trusted her completely. Danny didn't know about the trust arrangements, so how had Carl learned about them? I don't know. We'll figure it out. But Margaret, until we do, assume Carl has access to information he shouldn't have. Be careful who you talk to and what you say. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Danny's apartment. He answered the door in his warehouse uniform, getting ready for his morning shift. "Mom, what's wrong? You look terrible. Your father tried to have me declared mentally incompetent last night." Danny stared at me. "He what?" I showed him the guardianship petition. I watched his face change as he read through Carl's claims about my diminished capacity and need for protection. "This is insane," Danny said finally. "Mom, you're the most competent person I know. Thank you. But Danny, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Okay. Did you tell your father about the trust I set up?" "What trust?" His confusion was genuine. Danny didn't know about the estate protection measures, which meant Carl had learned about them some other way. "Someone told your father about some legal arrangements I made to protect my assets. If it wasn't you—" Danny's face darkened. "That bastard. I knew he was up to something." "What do you mean?" "Last night at dinner, he kept asking weird questions, like whether you'd been acting strangely, whether you'd mentioned talking to lawyers, whether anyone new had been giving you advice." Danny ran his hands through his hair. "I thought he was just being nosy. I didn't realize he was building some kind of case against you." Building a case. That's exactly what Carl had been doing, gathering information to support his guardianship petition. "Danny, what exactly did you tell him?" "Nothing useful, I hope. I said you seemed fine, maybe happier than you'd been since the divorce. I said you'd mentioned something about getting legal advice, but that seemed smart for someone with a large inheritance." Legal advice. That was enough information for Carl to start investigating. And if he'd hired a private investigator to follow me— "Mom, what can I do to help?" For the first time in months, Danny looked like the son I'd raised instead of the entitled young man he'd become. Crisis had a way of clarifying priorities. "Just tell the truth if anyone asks you questions. And Danny, be careful around your father. This guardianship thing is desperate behavior. Desperate people do unpredictable things." As I drove home, I realized that my mother's secret money had taught me more than just financial independence. It had taught me who my real family was, and who my real enemies were. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, which gave Jonathan and his team time to build our case. What they discovered was more disturbing than I'd imagined. Carl hadn't just filed the guardianship petition on impulse. He'd been planning this for weeks, ever since Danny had first mentioned the inheritance. Jonathan's investigator found evidence that Carl had hired a private detective to follow me, document my activities, and look for any evidence of diminished capacity or financial exploitation. The problem with Carl's plan was that I'd been behaving perfectly rationally. The private detective's reports actually supported my competency. I'd made reasonable purchases, consulted appropriate professionals, and managed my finances responsibly. "His own evidence contradicts his claims," Jonathan explained as we prepared for the hearing. "The private detective documented you meeting with financial advisors, researching investment options, and making conservative decisions. That's not the behavior of someone with diminished capacity. So we'll win? We'll destroy his petition. But Margaret, there's something else you need to know." Jonathan handed me a financial report his investigator had compiled on Carl. Reading it, I understood why he'd been so desperate to access my money. Carl's dental practice was failing. He'd overextended himself with equipment loans, office expansions, and risky investments. He was behind on his mortgage, his business loans, and his credit cards. The successful dentist who'd controlled every penny of our marriage was on the verge of bankruptcy. "He needs my money to save his practice," I said. "And when you wouldn't give it to him voluntarily, he decided to take legal control of it." The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit and drove to the courthouse. Carl was there with his lawyer, a sharp-faced woman who looked like she specialized in unpleasant legal battles. Danny was there too, sitting in the section reserved for witnesses. He'd asked to testify on my behalf, and Jonathan had agreed. My son's transformation over the past few months would be powerful evidence of my sound judgment. The hearing began with Carl's lawyer presenting his case. She painted a picture of a vulnerable widow who'd suddenly come into wealth and was being manipulated by unscrupulous advisors. She claimed my refusal to help Danny with his gambling debt showed impaired judgment and lack of maternal instinct. Then Jonathan stood up. He presented the private detective's reports that contradicted every claim Carl had made. He brought in Dr. Elizabeth Santos, a geriatric psychiatrist who'd evaluated me and found me completely competent. He showed financial records demonstrating that my investment decisions had been conservative and appropriate. But the moment that changed everything was when Jonathan played a recording. "Your Honor, the petitioner has claimed he's concerned about Mrs. Mitchell's welfare, but we have evidence suggesting his motivations are entirely financial." Jonathan pressed play on a digital recorder. Carl's voice filled the courtroom. "Look, I don't care if she's competent or not. That money should have been part of our divorce settlement. Her mother hid assets to screw me over, and now Margaret thinks she can just keep it all? I'm going to get control of those accounts one way or another." The recording was from Carl's dinner with Danny. My son had recorded the conversation on his phone when Carl started revealing his real motivations. Carl's face went white as his own words played in the courtroom. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Jonathan continued, "we have evidence that Mr. Mitchell has filed false police reports, engaged in midnight harassment, and hired private investigators to stalk his ex-wife. This is not the behavior of someone concerned about Mrs. Mitchell's welfare. This is the behavior of someone attempting financial exploitation." The judge looked at Carl with undisguised disgust. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm dismissing your petition. Not only is there no evidence of diminished capacity, but there's substantial evidence that you're the one engaging in exploitative behavior." The judge paused, looking over her glasses at Carl. "I'm also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal charges. Filing false guardianship petitions is a serious crime." Carl's lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear, and they both stood up quickly. "Your Honor, my client would like to withdraw his petition and apologize for any misunderstanding." "Too late for that, Counselor. The petition is dismissed with prejudice, and the referral stands." As we left the courtroom, Carl tried to approach me in the hallway. "Margaret, wait. This got out of hand. I never meant—" "Stay away from me, Carl," I said calmly, "and stay away from my son. You can't just—" "Actually, she can," Jonathan interrupted, handing Carl an envelope. "Restraining order. You're to have no contact with Mrs. Mitchell or her family." Carl took the envelope with shaking hands. "Margaret, please, I'm losing everything." I looked at this man I'd been married to for 15 years. This man I'd supported through dental school, worked 3 jobs to help, sacrificed my own dreams for. This man who had controlled my finances, questioned my purchases, and made me feel guilty for every dollar I spent. And I felt nothing. "Carl," I said, "you lost everything because of your own choices, just like you tried to make me lose everything because of yours." Walking out of that courthouse, I realized my mother's greatest gift hadn't been the money. It had been the lesson in protecting what mattered from people who would destroy it. 3 months later, I was sitting in my garden reading when Danny knocked on my door. He looked different, healthier, more confident. Working full-time and managing his own responsibilities had been good for him. "Mom, I wanted to tell you something." "What's that?" "I finished paying off the casino debt yesterday." I smiled. "I'm proud of you." "And I wanted to apologize for the stealing, the gambling, the entitlement, for not understanding what you were trying to teach me." "Danny." "No, let me finish. I've been thinking about Grandma's money, and about Dad, and about everything that happened. You could have bailed me out any time. You could have made all my problems go away with one check." "Yes, I could have. But then I never would have learned to solve my own problems. I would have stayed the same irresponsible kid who thought Mom would always fix everything." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "You're not that kid anymore." "No, I'm not. And Mom, I'm grateful you didn't write that check, even when it was hard, even when I hated you for it." That evening, I called Patricia to share the news about Danny's debt being paid off. "So what's next?" she asked. "You've got a beautiful home. Your son's turned his life around. Your ex-husband's out of the picture. What does Margaret do now?" It was a good question. For months, I'd been focused on protecting my inheritance and teaching Danny responsibility. But what did I want to do with the rest of my life? I looked around my condo at my mother's jewelry, her photographs, her careful letters. She'd spent 30 years sacrificing her happiness to protect my future. She'd given up love, companionship, and her own dreams to make sure I had choices. "I think," I said, "it's time to start living the life my mother made possible." The next morning, I submitted my resignation from the secretary job I'd held for 8 years. I'd been good at it, but it had never been my dream. It had just been what I could do to survive. With my mother's money behind me, I could finally ask myself what I wanted to do instead of what I had to do. I enrolled in the master's degree program I'd abandoned when I married Carl. I signed up for the photography class I'd always wanted to take. I planned a trip to Europe that I'd been dreaming about for 20 years. But most importantly, I started a scholarship fund at the local community college. For single mothers going back to school, for women starting over after divorce, for people who needed second chances and the financial support to make them possible. I named it the Eleanor Henderson Memorial Scholarship, after my mother's maiden name. Because the best way to honor someone's sacrifice isn't to hoard what they gave you. It's to use it to create the opportunities they never had. 6 months later, I was reviewing scholarship applications when I came across one that made me smile. A 28-year-old man named Danny Mitchell, applying for funding to attend trade school while working full-time. His essay was titled, "Learning to Fish Instead of Asking for Handouts." I approved his application immediately. After all, the best investments are always in people who've learned to invest in themselves. As I sat in my garden that evening, watching the sunset over the river, I thought about my mother's secret necklace and the fortune it had revealed. But mostly, I thought about the woman who'd worn it every day for 40 years, keeping secrets and making sacrifices so her daughter could have choices. She'd never know that her gift had saved not just my financial future, but my self-respect, my relationships, and my understanding of what real love looks like. But maybe, somehow, she knew that the little girl in the locket had finally learned to protect what mattered most, including herself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.